The boardroom on the 42nd floor smelled like leather, ambition, and someone's aggressively expensive cologne. I sat in the third chair from the head of the table, a position I had occupied every second Tuesday for the past 2 years, and I pressed my palm flat against my thigh under the table to stop my fingers from trembling. 7 months. 7 months pregnant, and I had somehow managed to hide it from my colleagues, from my boss, from the entire executive floor of Meridian Holdings. I wore my suits tailored loose across the shoulder to compensate for the way my chest had grown fuller. I ate at my desk so no one would watch me load my plate. I took the stairs only when the elevator was empty, moving slowly, one hand brushing the wall. Today was not going to be easy. The quarterly earnings report was spread across the table in neat color-coded packets. I had prepared them myself, working until 2 in the morning, sitting on my couch with a pillow wedged behind my back and a cup of chamomile tea going cold beside me. The numbers were good. The numbers were actually very good. I needed this meeting to go smoothly, and then I needed everyone to leave so I could sit quietly and breathe. The baby had other plans. I felt the kick somewhere around the moment that Darren Voss from Legal began his opening remarks. Not a flutter, not the soft interior ripple that I had grown used to in recent weeks. A full, deliberate, undeniable kick, the kind that shifts the visible landscape of a rounded belly even through the architecture of a button-down shirt, a vest, and a suit jacket. My breath caught. I looked down at the table. I smoothed my expression. And, as you can see from column 4, the liability assessment shows another one. Harder this time, like a small insistence, like a reminder. I know, I thought. I know you are there. Please be quiet for 45 minutes. The chair beside me pulled back. I had not paid attention to who was sitting there. The seats filled as people arrived, and I had been focused on arranging my packets and reviewing my section headers, and not thinking about the fact that the baby had been unusually active since morning, or that I had been on my feet too long yesterday, or that I was now so visibly, undeniably large that the tailor I trusted had looked at me last week with a very careful expression and said nothing at all. The chair beside me settled back into place. Someone had arrived late, someone large. I sensed that before I looked, the way you sense a change in barometric pressure. The air in that corner of the room shifted slightly. Something warm moved in. Herman Rich. I knew his name the way you know the name of anyone who occupies a significant amount of space in a building, not because we were friends, not because we had ever spoken at length, but because Herman Rich was the sort of person a room reorganized itself around. He was head of strategy. He had been brought in from outside the company about 6 months ago, quietly, the way significant things often happen quietly in large organizations. He sat on the executive committee. He wore his authority without performance, which, in my experience, was rarer than anyone liked to admit. He was also, and this is the part I had been careful not to think about too directly, an alpha and not a subtle one. I could tell. 7 months of pregnancy had made every one of my senses uncomfortably acute, and the moment Herman Rich settled into the chair beside me, every nerve in my body registered him like a weather system. I kept my eyes on Darren Voss. I kept my hands still. I breathed through my nose. The baby kicked again. It was not a small kick. Herman Rich turned his head. I felt it before I saw it. The weight of that attention, slow and specific. Not the sideways glance of someone who happened to look over. Something more deliberate. Something that said, I noticed. I did not look at him. Darren Voss moved on to the second slide. Under the table, I placed one hand on the side of my abdomen, partly to feel, partly as a futile attempt at gentle discouragement. The baby pushed back against my palm, cheerful and impervious. I exhaled very slowly through slightly parted lips. Lauren. It was almost nothing. Less than a whisper. Herman Rich had turned his head, just enough. His voice dropped low enough that only I could have heard it. My name in his mouth was careful, like he was testing whether I was actually there. I turned to look at him. His eyes were dark, brown with something deep underneath, the color of river water over stone. He was looking at me with an expression I couldn't immediately categorize. Not shock, not discomfort. Something attentive and still, like a man who had just noticed something important and had decided in the same moment not to make a scene about it. His gaze dropped to the table, then back to my face. I understood the implication. He had felt it. The kick. Through the arm of the chair, through the proximity. Or he had simply seen, in my face, the precise moment it happened. My jaw tightened. I gave the smallest possible shake of my head. Not now, this is not the time, please, and turned back toward the front of the room. To his credit, he turned back too, but I could feel him there for the rest of the meeting, aware, present, a stillness that was somehow louder than the projector fan, and Darren's voice and the shuffle of packets. When I stood to present my section on Q3 performance indicators, I watched Herman Rich's attention settle on me completely, and I focused very hard on the numbers I had stayed up until 2 in the morning to understand. And I did not think about the fact that my jacket was pulling across the front and that the baby had by some small mercy gone temporarily quiet. I presented the full segment without incident. When I sat back down, Herman's shoulder was 6 inches from mine, and he said nothing, and I said nothing, and the meeting went on. The meeting ended at 10:40. People gathered their packets, pulled on jackets, began the low-volume conversations of professionals who have survived another quarterly review. I took my time, stacking my copies neatly, checking my phone for messages, buying time until the room thinned. Herman Rich did not leave. He stood by the window with his hands in his pockets, looking at the city below with the patience of someone who had decided to wait. The last assistant filed out and closed the glass door, and it was just the two of us and the view and the hum of the climate control system. I stood. I picked up my folder. How far along? His voice was the same quiet register as it had been during the meeting. Not loud. Not demanding. Just a question, offered plainly, without decoration. I considered lying. The instinct was immediate and practiced. I had been managing this secret for months, and the mechanisms of deflection were well oiled. But there was something in the directness of the question that made the usual responses feel small. Also, I was tired. 7 months of sustained deception is exhausting in ways that accumulate. 7 months, I said. He nodded once. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man receiving confirmation of something he had suspected. Does anyone here know? No. Another nod. He turned from the window and looked at me, fully looked, the way he had not quite allowed himself to during the meeting. I felt the assessment and did not flinch from it. I was used to assessments. I had been making them of myself in the mirror every morning with increasing complexity. Are you all right? He asked. The question landed differently than I expected. Not are you managing? Not is everything handled? Not have you thought about what this means for your project timeline? Just are you all right? Simple, direct, with a quality of actual wanting to know underneath it. Something in my chest moved, which I immediately attributed to the baby and not to Herman Rich. I'm fine, I said. Then, because he was still looking at me, I added, today was a lot of standing. You should have been seated. I presented, you present standing. Not when you're 7 months pregnant. I almost smiled. Almost. If I'd sat down to present, Darren Voss would have asked why, and then the entire meeting would have been about me instead of about Q3 performance. Herman Rich considered this. He had the quality of someone who genuinely thought before speaking, which was, in my experience, far less common than it should be. That's fair, he finally said. I know. It doesn't mean it was the right choice for your body. Most choices I've made in the last 7 months weren't the right choice for my body. I've been managing. He was quiet again. The city moved below us, traffic patterns and weather systems and 10,000 small lives. The baby shifted. A long, slow roll rather than a kick. A repositioning. And I put one hand briefly to my side without thinking. Herman's eyes tracked the movement. Who knows? He asked. Outside of the office. It was a more personal question than the first one. I considered him for a moment. The stillness of him, the careful quality of his attention, the fact that he was still here when he could have left with everyone else. My sister, my doctor, the tailor who made these suits. I paused. Now you. Something moved across his expression, too quick to read precisely. He looked away back toward the window and I watched his profile, the angle of his jaw, the way he held his shoulders, and felt a version of something that I told myself was simply the residual effect of 8 months of hormonal restructuring. I'm not going to say anything, he said, if that's what you're wondering. I wasn't wondering. You were. He turned back and looked at me with the faintest edge of something that was not quite a smile but occupied the same neighborhood. Maybe, I admitted. He picked up the packet from the table, my packet, the one I had prepared until 2 in the morning, and tucked it under his arm. The Q3 numbers are good. You did strong work. I know. You always do. I looked at him. He said it without flattery, the way someone states a fact about the weather or the time. You always do. As if he had been paying attention before today. Thank you, I said, because it seemed like the right response to a fact offered plainly. We rode the elevator down together. He had 4 floors to go before mine, and we stood in the moving space with a foot of air between us and said nothing. The silence was not uncomfortable. It had texture to it and weight, but not the sharp edges of awkwardness. The baby moved again, slower now, settling. At the 31st floor, he stepped out, then paused, one hand on the door. Lauren, yes, take the elevator tomorrow and eat something that isn't from the vending machine on 14. He glanced at me, and there was the edge of that not quite smile again. I've seen you, Tuesday mornings. The doors closed before I could think of what to say. I stood alone in the elevator and breathed. The thing about being noticed is that once it starts, you become suddenly, uncomfortably aware of all the ways you had been invisible before. I had worked at Meridian Holdings for 4 years. I had been promoted twice, moved departments, once survived 2 corporate restructurings, 3 annual reviews, and one very difficult period in which the head of my division had been replaced by someone with different priorities, and I had been required to quietly, systematically make myself indispensable to him. I was good at my work. I was competent and thorough and reliable, and I existed in the pleasant professional ambiguity of someone who is respected without being particularly known. Herman Rich began to know me. It was not dramatic. Nothing that happened between us was ever dramatic. That was one of the things I came to understand about him. He moved through the world with a quietness that was not passivity. It was more like the deliberate control of someone who had decided exactly how much of himself to deploy in any given situation, and deployed it precisely. He started by showing up in my doorway, not often, once or twice a week, sometimes with a question about data I had produced, sometimes with a document that he wanted a second opinion on. He would stand in the frame. He was tall enough that he didn't have to duck, but only barely, and we would talk for 5 minutes, or 10, and then he would leave. He did not ask about the pregnancy again, but he noticed everything related to it without making it the subject. When I arrived in the small conference room for a working lunch that had been arranged by the division head, I found that the chair nearest the door, which was the most accessible, and which had a slightly higher seat, had been quietly reserved, not officially, just cleared of its extra papers and positioned with a small deliberateness that no one else would have noticed. When the office ordered lunch and the delivery included, inexplicably, a container of miso soup that no one had asked for, it appeared on my desk with no note. When a cross-departmental meeting ran long and moved into the early evening and the building's heat system began its after-hours reduction, a jacket materialized over the back of my chair. A man's jacket, good wool, smelling of cedar and something clean. Herman was 3 seats down and deep in a conversation with the CFO and appeared to notice nothing. I wore it for the rest of the meeting. It was too big for me. I didn't give it back that night. I told myself these were small things. Professional courtesies, the kind of consideration that any decent person might offer to a colleague in a complicated situation. I told myself that until the Wednesday in late October when I was working late, genuinely late past 8, because there was a budget projection due the following morning and my body had decided somewhere around 6:30 that it was going to be an uncomfortable evening, and Herman appeared in my office doorway. I was sitting sideways in my chair, one hand pressed to the lower right side of my back, squinting at a spreadsheet that refused to cooperate. "You're still here," he said. "Budget projections. Due tomorrow." I didn't look up. "You're still here too. I'm always here late." "So am I. You're 7.5 months pregnant. 7 3/4 approximately." He was quiet for a moment. I heard him move, not leaving, moving in. When I finally looked up, he had pulled the chair from the small meeting table in the corner of my office and placed it beside my desk. And he sat down in it with a kind of matter-of-fact ease that suggested he had made a decision and was comfortable with it. "Show me the projection," he said. I know you don't need help. Show me anyway." 2 sets of eyes are faster than one. I looked at him. He looked at me. He had his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow and his tie loosened, which was the most casual I had ever seen him in a professional context. And he looked like someone who had nowhere else to be and hadn't decided this was a problem. I turned the monitor slightly so he could see. We worked for an hour and 40 minutes. He caught 2 formula errors I had made, not criticizing, just noting them. The way you note a stone in a path before someone trips, and contributed a modeling approach for the variable cost projection that was genuinely better than mine. I told him so. He accepted it without excessive modesty. At some point, he got up and brought me a cup of tea from the kitchen on our floor without asking if I wanted one, and he got one for himself as well. And we drank them and kept working. The baby moved in long, slow rotations, the way it did in the evenings. At 9:40, we finished. I leaned back in my chair and stretched, cautiously, one hand going automatically to the underside of my belly, and Herman watched this, not intrusively, but with an attentiveness that he no longer bothered to conceal around me. "You should go home," he said. "The projection is done." "That's why you should go home. The work is done." I looked at him sideways. "Did you just use my own logic against me? I learned from you." That pulled an actual laugh from me, short and surprised. Herman's expression shifted in response, something warming in it, and for a moment the office was very quiet and very small. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Yes, why are you doing this?" I gestured, not precisely, but in the general direction of the miso soup. The jacket, the chair positioned by the door, this hour of budget modeling at 9:40 on a Wednesday. I'm not complaining, I'm genuinely asking. He was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet he used when he was deciding whether to say what he was actually thinking. "Because someone should," he said. It was not a satisfying answer in the way that a full explanation would have been, but it had a quality of honesty to it that a longer answer might not have had. "That's it?" I asked. "For now," he said. And then, after a beat, "You do everything alone. I'm very capable of. I know you are. That's not what I meant." He looked at me directly, his dark eyes steady. "You're capable. That's not the same as this being how it should be." I didn't answer. The baby rolled. Outside, the city hummed its nighttime frequency. "Let me drive you home," Herman said. I know, you have a car. Or a preference for the train. Or something that represents your independence and self-sufficiency." He stood and straightened his collar. "I'll drive you home, Lorne." I let him drive me home. His car was clean and quiet, dark interior, the kind of vehicle that felt considered rather than showy. The city moved past the windows in its nighttime version, lit and layered. The day's urgency softened into the slower rhythms of evening. I sat in the passenger seat with my coat open, because my coat no longer closed properly, and I watched the streets without really seeing them. "Are you comfortable?" he asked, about 5 minutes in. "Adequately. That's not the same as yes. The seatbelt is a little," I gestured vaguely. He reached over without looking away from the road, and his hand found the seatbelt's path across my chest and redirected it slightly, a small adjustment. Impersonal and precise, so that it crossed my shoulder rather than my collarbone. His hand was back on the wheel before I had quite processed the touch. "Better?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Thank you." We drove. "Tell me something," I said when the silence had become comfortable enough to speak into. "What do you want to know?" "Anything. You know things about me that I didn't give you." "I know almost nothing about you." I turned my head to look at his profile. "You came from somewhere else, 6 months ago. You're head of strategy, but you work later than anyone in the building, which suggests the work is actually personal to you rather than just a title. You don't eat in the executive dining room, which means either you dislike the food or you dislike the company. And you notice things that most people don't bother to notice." A quiet beat. "That's already quite a lot." "Those are observations, not information," he considered. "What do you want to know specifically?" "Whatever you choose to tell me." Another of his deliberate silences. I was learning to inhabit them, to understand them as working spaces rather than absences. "I took this position because I needed a change," he said. "The previous one. I was good at it, but I had been in it for a long time, and I had let it become the whole of what I was. That's not a good situation." "What changed?" I realized I had stopped noticing things. I looked at him. "That's why you notice everything now. It's more that when you lose something and then recover it, you understand its value differently." The city thinned as we moved toward my neighborhood. The buildings grew smaller, the streets wider. "And the not eating in the executive dining room?" He almost smiled. "The food is fine. The conversations aren't. Everyone is performing. And you prefer people who aren't performing." "I prefer honesty. It's rarer. A pause. "You're honest. I've been lying to every person in that building for 7 months. About one specific thing, for specific reasons. Your work is honest. Your assessments are honest. When you disagree with something in a meeting, you say so without dressing it up." He glanced at me briefly. "Most people don't do that. Most people are protecting something." "What are you protecting?" I thought about it. The baby shifted, and I put a hand to my side reflexively. "My autonomy, I suppose. My right to manage my own situation on my own terms." If I had disclosed the pregnancy earlier, it would have become everyone's business, everyone's concern, everyone's opinion, everyone's projection of what I should do next. I wasn't ready for that. And now I'm almost 8 months along and it's about to become physically undeniable regardless of what I want. So, I exhaled. The timetable is moving itself. Are you afraid? The question was gentle, not probing, an opening. Yes, I said, and it came out steadier than I expected. About most of it. The birth, the logistics, the leave, coming back, what happens to my workload, who covers what, all of it. I paused. The baby itself, less so. The baby feels real to me in a way that the rest of it doesn't quite yet. That makes sense. Does it? The concrete over the abstract, he said. You feel the baby every day. The rest is still hypothetical. I looked at him. You're surprisingly easy to talk to. You sound surprised. You're intimidating in meetings. Am I? You don't say much, but when you do, it lands differently than other people's words. People adjust their positions based on what you say. That's a kind of power. I don't intend to intimidate. Intent and effect aren't always the same thing. A beat. You asked me a personal question. Can I ask you one? Yes. Why did you come and sit with me tonight, specifically? Not the general answer, the specific one. The light at the intersection ahead turned red. He stopped, and in the stopped car, with the city quiet around us, he turned and looked at me directly. Because I wanted to, he said. Because watching you manage everything alone, with no one aware enough of what that costs you to do anything about it. That bothered me. And because when I'm around you, I notice things more clearly than I do anywhere else. The light turned green. He drove. My building appeared ahead. He pulled to the curb with the practiced ease of someone who had driven this kind of street before, and he shifted into park and neither of us moved immediately. Thank you, I said, for tonight, all of it. The projection or the ride? Both. He nodded once. Then, quietly, get some rest, Lauren. I got out of the car and walked to my building door and I did not look back, but I heard his car idling at the curb until I was through the door, which meant he waited until he knew I was safe inside. I stood in my lobby and pressed the elevator button and felt something warm and complicated spreading through my chest. The baby kicked once, satisfied. November arrived with cold air and early dark and a new phase of everything being harder. My body had moved into its final stage of adjustment, a gravity-altered, sleep-interrupted, breathless after staircases reality that I managed with the same organizational efficiency I applied to everything. I had a system. The system was less effective than it used to be, but it held. Herman and I developed something that neither of us named. He came by my office twice a week, sometimes 3 times. We talked about work, genuinely, because there was genuine overlap in our areas, and because we were both the kind of people who found intellectual engagement restorative, but the conversations moved, almost always, beyond work. I learned things about him the way I learned things about a city, not all at once, but through repeated visits to different corners. He had grown up without much. He said this matter-of-factly with no performance of hardship. He had worked his way into business through a combination of ability and the particular stubbornness of someone who has decided that the shape of their life will not be determined by the circumstances of their beginning. He had been, at various points, someone who worked too hard and too exclusively, and the reassessment that had brought him here was the result of a long and not entirely comfortable period of reconsidering what he was actually doing and why. He asked good questions, not intrusive ones. He had a quality of knowing exactly how far to go without overstepping, which I suspected took more practice than he made it look. He asked about my work before Meridian. He asked about my sister, who I mentioned occasionally, and remembered everything I told him with a precision that startled me the first few times. He asked what I liked to read, what music I put on when I was working late, what I found genuinely interesting as opposed to professionally necessary. These are not the questions of a colleague. I knew that. I was not naive about what was happening. And I was not naive about my own responses to it. The warmth I felt in his presence had a specific quality, the way my attention arranged itself in a room he was also in. That was not professional courtesy. The fact that his jacket, which I had kept and dry cleaned and had every intention of returning, was still on the hook behind my office door 2 months later, that was not an oversight. But I was 8 months pregnant and I was in the middle of the largest personal transition of my life. And whatever this was had a fragility to it that I was unwilling to disturb. I said nothing. He said nothing. We continued. The Thursday before I finally filed my leave paperwork, he came by later than usual. Nearly 6, the office mostly emptied, and sat in the chair he had long since claimed as his visiting spot. And he did something he almost never did. He looked tired, not catastrophically, not in crisis, but the edges of him were softer than usual. The careful economy of his expression slightly relaxed, as though the day had been one too many of something and he hadn't quite recovered. Bad day? I asked. Long one. He stretched his neck slightly, a small concession to discomfort. The Meridian Southeast strategy was rejected by the board, not the work, the timing. They want to revisit in Q2. That was 6 months of work. More. He let out a breath. It'll go. Just not now. I'm sorry. It's not the work I mind. It's the... He paused, choosing words, as he always did. It's the sitting with something you've built and knowing it's good, and watching it get set aside for reasons that are real but still feel arbitrary. I know that feeling, I said. I know you do. We sat with it for a moment. Outside, the wind was moving leaves from the plane trees against the window glass, a soft, irregular percussion. I filed the leave paperwork today, I said. He looked at me. When does it start? 2 weeks. The plan is to work until 38 weeks unless it becomes necessary to leave earlier. I had rehearsed this sentence. It still felt awkward in my mouth. Okay, he said. I've prepared transition documents for all my active projects. The Q1 projections are essentially complete except for the final variable cost inputs, which I've noted in the handover. Marcus can, Lauren, handle the client communications and the presentation for the Lauren. His voice was not sharp, just precise, enough to stop me. I stopped. The transition documents will be fine, he said. Marcus will manage. Your projects will survive. He looked at me steadily. That's not what I want to talk about. What do you want to talk about? He leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his knees, and he looked at me with that particular quality of his attention, the one that felt like being seen at a resolution that most people didn't bother with. Are you ready? He asked. Not the paperwork, not the handover. You. I opened my mouth, closed it, tried again. I think so. I don't know how you know until it's happening. Yes. Are you scared? Yes. We covered this. More scared than before? I thought about it honestly. Differently scared. Before it was the logistics. Now it's the moment itself. The fact that it becomes real in a different way. There's a person, and then they're here, and then everything has changed. Everything was already changed, he said gently. I know, but there's a version of the change that's still in front of me, and once it isn't, I made a gesture that wasn't quite a word. He nodded. He understood. You're going to be good at this, he said. You don't know that. I know how you work. I know how you think. I know you've been managing this alone for 8 months with more competence and more grace than most people manage things that are far less difficult. Something shifted in his expression. You're going to be good at it. The wind moved more leaves. The office was very quiet. The baby, who had been still for most of the afternoon, chose this moment to make a long, slow, sweeping movement, the kind that was visible even from outside, the surface of my belly briefly changing shape. Herman's eyes went to it. He didn't look away this time. Does it hurt? He asked, quietly, carefully. No, not usually. Just pressure and sensation. It's strange to describe. He nodded slowly. Can I? He stopped. He stopped, and for the first time in all our weeks of careful conversation, he looked uncertain. I understood the question he hadn't finished. Yes, I said. He reached out, slowly, with the same precision he brought to everything, and placed his large hand flat against the side of my belly. He didn't press, just rested. The baby moved into the warmth of his palm like a plant toward light. Another long push, recognizing something. Herman's eyes closed for just a moment. When they opened, they were different. The professional surface, the carefully maintained remove gone. Just the man. Just this. Oh, he said, softly. Yes, I agreed. His hand stayed. The baby settled against it, and I sat there in my office in the early dark of November and let it be real. This thing between us, this thing that had been growing as quietly and inevitably as everything else in my life lately. Herman, I said, yes, when I come back, after leave, I think I'd like to have dinner with you. He was still for a moment. Then, only dinner? Let's start with dinner. The corner of his mouth moved. I've been waiting a long time for that. You've known me for 11 weeks. It felt longer. He removed his hand slowly, as though reluctant to break the contact. Yes, dinner. When you're ready. I'm already ready. I just needed the conditions to be simpler. Yes. They're about to get significantly less simple, he said with a look toward my belly. I laughed, a real one, full and surprised. I'm aware. I'll still want dinner. Good, I said. So will I. My son was born on a Saturday. I will not make this into something it wasn't. It was hard and it was extraordinary, and it was the most physical thing I have ever experienced. And none of the preparing I had done for it quite reached the reality of it. My sister was there, which was everything. The medical team was competent and kind. The hospital room was small and bright and smelled of antiseptic and something floral that someone must have thought would be calming. He arrived at 4:17 in the morning, and the first thing he did was announce himself at considerable volume. And the second thing he did was find my finger with his whole hand and grip it with a tenacity that startled me into tears. My sister cried openly, noisily, without any apparent concern for dignity, which I found extremely comforting. I named him after my father, who had been gone for 3 years and who would have loved this entire mess with his whole entire heart. Elliot, 7 pounds 2 ounces. Dark hair already. A mouth like a small decisive opinion. I texted Herman at 6 in the morning from a bed that was tilted to keep me comfortable, with Elliot asleep on my chest like a question mark. The text said, "Boy, 7 EB. We're both fine," he replied in 4 minutes. His reply said, "I'm glad. Rest, I'll be here when you're ready." And then, after a pause of perhaps 30 seconds, one more message. "Congratulations, Lauren." I read it 3 times. I held my son and thought about the specific quality of Herman Rich's stillness and the way he waited with the patience of someone who understood what things cost. And the fact that I was going to go to dinner with him as soon as my body returned to something adjacent to its former capability. I held Elliot and the city came up into its morning, and something that had been tight in me for a very long time began, slowly, to loosen. Leave was its own country, a country with its own time zones, its own logic, its own physics. Sleep became a negotiation. Meals became events I had to plan strategically. My apartment, which I had always kept with an organized neatness that bordered on the controlled, became a landscape of small person infrastructure. The bouncer in the living room, the changing station in the bedroom corner, the muslin blankets that multiplied somehow, the small socks that appeared in unexpected places. Elliot was difficult in the ways that all infants are difficult, and specific to himself in ways that surprised me. He was alert, extraordinarily alert. He watched everything with the serious attention of someone taking notes. He disliked being put down when he would prefer to be held, which was frequently, and he had opinions about this that he expressed with a vocal confidence I recognized. My sister came Tuesdays and Thursdays. A postpartum support person came on Monday mornings. I managed the rest. I was competent, but competent does not mean solitary, and by the 6th week I understood the difference in a way that was bone deep. Herman texted with what I came to understand was a deliberate regularity, not so much as to be pressure, enough to be presence. A question here. A piece of news from the office there. An article he thought I'd find interesting. Once, a photo of his view from the office on a particularly clear day with a message that said Q3 presentation in an hour. Wish your numbers were here. I sent back. They still are. You just have to use them correctly. He replied, "Show me over dinner." I looked at that text for a long time. At 2.5 months, Elliot began sleeping in something resembling a pattern. Not always, not reliably, but enough that I could sometimes see ahead of me a few hours of consecutive time and make something of them. At 11 weeks, I called Herman, not texted. Called, because I had decided that this thing deserved a voice. He answered on the second ring. "Lauren, are you still available for dinner?" A short silence. Warm. "Yes." "Good. I need a restaurant with good acoustics and the ability to accommodate an 11-week-old who may or may not participate. I'll make a reservation. You don't know when I'm free. Tell me." I told him. He made the reservation. He sent me the details with a specificity that told me he had already thought about what kind of restaurant would work, the location, the noise level, the fact that it had a section in the back with more space. He had already thought about it before I called. I dressed carefully on a Thursday evening in February. I wore something that actually fit, which was its own small luxury. I left Elliot with my sister with more instructions than were probably necessary and took a car to the restaurant and arrived first because arriving first is one of my organizing principles. Herman arrived 3 minutes later. He came through the door in a dark coat and found me immediately, across the room, through the early dinner crowd, and something in his face changed when he saw me. Not performed, just real. He crossed to the table and sat across from me, and we looked at each other. "You look well," he said. "I look approximately 40% functional," I said, "which I'm told is actually quite good at 3 months postpartum." "You look well," he repeated, simply, and I understood that he meant it the way he meant everything, precisely and without exaggeration, which made it worth more. "You look the same," I said. "Is that bad?" "No. It's grounding. I picked up the menu. I've been in a country with completely different physics for 11 weeks. Seeing something familiar is." I paused. "It's nice." He looked at me over his menu. "Tell me." So I told him. Not everything. Not the hard nights or the specific fears of the week around week 7 when I had sat on the bathroom floor at 3 in the morning and cried in a way that had nothing to do with sadness and everything to do with the sheer weight of it all. But the real things. The texture of those weeks. The way Elliot's face was already its own face, distinct and opinionated. The way I had come to understand, in my body rather than my mind, what this was. He listened. He asked questions. The good kind. The kind that showed he had been thinking about what I said, rather than preparing his next sentence. When the food arrived, we ate, and I realized midway through the meal that my shoulders had dropped from their habitual elevation, and my jaw had unclenched, and something in me had simply settled. "I owe you something," I said near the end of the meal. "You don't owe me anything." "I do. You showed up for me when you had no particular reason to, and you did it without making it about you, which is actually very rare. I want to say thank you properly." I met his eyes. "Thank you for all of it. The meetings and the budget projections and the drives home and the dast." I stopped. The hand. He was quiet for a moment. "You don't need to thank me for that. I want to. I wasn't doing it to earn something. I know. That's exactly why it meant what it did." He looked at me the way he sometimes did, thoroughly, with the patience of someone who had decided he was interested in accuracy over speed. "Can I say something?" "Yes. I came by your office that many times, and I stayed that many evenings, and I drove you home and sent you articles and thought about you considerably more than is probably professionally appropriate." A pause, and something that was unmistakably a smile, now quiet and real. "Not out of charity. I want you to know that clearly. It wasn't pity. It wasn't a project. It was because I wanted to be near you. Specifically, you." The restaurant hummed around us. A couple at the table to our left were celebrating something. The waiter passed with dessert menus. "I know," I said. "You know?" I said. "You know I know it wasn't pity." I could tell. I looked at him steadily. "I'm not easy to feel pity for, and even if I were, you're not particularly in the habit of offering it. No. And I want to be near you specifically, too. I have for a while. I just needed time. Conditions. I remember, you wanted things to be simpler." "They're still not simple," I said. "I have an infant. I'm going back to work in 5 weeks. My life is considerably more complicated than it was 7 months ago." "I know. And you still want dinner." "I want considerably more than dinner," he said. "But I meant what I said about starting there." I looked at him, at the dark warmth of his eyes, the set of his jaw, the hands resting on the table between us, careful, still, present. "So do I said. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his, not pressing, not performing, just there. I turned my hand over. What followed was not a montage, not a rush, not any of the sudden transformations that happen in stories that prioritize narrative economy over emotional truth. What followed was slow and real and, in its slowness, deeply good. Herman and I had dinner again, 2 weeks later, at a different restaurant. He came to my apartment the following Sunday for what was ostensibly a working session on a project that overlapped our departments, and was in reality a working session on a project that overlapped our departments. Plus 4 hours of being in the same space with Elliot asleep in the next room and takeout containers on the coffee table, and a conversation that moved from quarterly projections to the nature of ambition to what we both quietly wanted from the years ahead. He held Elliot for the first time that day. I handed him over with instructions. Support the head. He tips to the left when he wants to look at something. If he fusses, he sometimes just needs. "I have him," Herman said, and he did. He held Elliot with the careful competence of someone approaching something that mattered, and Elliot looked up at him with those particular dark eyes of his and then did the thing he sometimes did, which was reach up and grip the nearest available finger. Herman looked down at that grip. I watched his face. I watched the thing that moved through it. He does that, I said. I know. His voice was slightly different. You told me about it. At the hospital. You said it startled you. You remembered that. I remember everything you tell me. I stood there in my living room on a Sunday afternoon in early spring and watched the man I was falling in love with hold my son. And I let it be what it was. Herman, I said. He looked up. I'm keeping the jacket. He looked momentarily confused, and then, because he remembered everything, he understood. The wool jacket, the one that had appeared over the back of my chair on that long meeting evening 4 months ago now. The one I had dry cleaned and meant to return. He looked at me with something that was entirely visible now, entirely unhidden. Keep it, he said. I went back to work at the end of March. The return was not as complex as I had feared, partly because I had done the preparation, and partly because the office had, in my absence, apparently reorganized slightly to accommodate a reality everyone now knew about. My transition documents had been thorough, Marcus had managed adequately, the Q1 projections had landed well, and Herman had, in his quiet, specific way, made things easier without advertising that he was doing so. I didn't learn the details. I suspected I wouldn't because that was how he operated. But I felt the effect of them. I came back. I was good at my work. I was also, for the first time in a long time, not doing everything alone. Herman was in my doorway again the first week back, same as before, asking about a data model he was building. We talked about it. Then we talked about other things. He asked how Elliot was. I showed him a photo, a recent one, where Elliot was looking at something just outside the frame with the expression of someone forming a strong opinion about it. Herman looked at the photo for longer than was strictly necessary and then handed the phone back. He looks like you when you're about to disagree with a budget allocation, he said. He looks like himself, I said. Yes, he agreed. He does. It was a Wednesday in May, the building coming alive with the particular energy of an organization moving into its busy season, when Herman appeared in my doorway and, instead of asking about data or strategy or anything professional at all, said, I want to take you somewhere on Saturday. I looked up from my monitor. Where? Not far. There's a market that runs on Saturday mornings. I go occasionally. There's good produce and a coffee stand that I think you'd like. He paused. I'd like to show it to you. I thought about Saturday. Elliot's aunt had offered to take him in the morning so I could have a few hours of something that wasn't office-related recovery. The morning was technically available. Is this a date? I asked. Yes, he said without hesitation, in the context of the dinners we've had, which were already also dates. Yes, right. I looked at him. I just wanted to make sure we're calling things what they are. We are. He leaned slightly against the door frame, and in the morning light of my office, he looked good, present, like himself, which I understood now was a specific and valuable thing. I should have said it more directly before now. I didn't want to push. You never push. No. Sometimes I want you to push a little more. Something shifted in his expression. I'll keep that in mind. Good. The morning came. The market was everything he had implied. Colorful and loud in a Saturday morning way, not the loud of crisis, but the loud of ordinary life doing its thing. We walked between the stalls with our coffees, and he pointed out the vendors he knew by name, and I found herbs I had been unable to locate elsewhere. And we talked without any of the professional container that usually shaped our conversations. Out here, without the office, he was the same person. That was one of the things I had already suspected, and it confirmed itself now. The stillness was the same. The careful attention was the same. The quality of being genuinely present was the same. He wasn't one thing at work and another in the world. He was coherent. And that coherence was, I realized, one of the things I most valued in people and found most rarely. We sat at a small table outside a coffee stand and drank our second coffees and watched the market move around us. Can I say something out loud? I asked. Always. I'm happy right now. I looked at him, slightly to the side. I don't always know when I am. I have a tendency to assess rather than experience. But right now I'm doing this and I'm aware of it and I'm, yes, happy. Herman was quiet for a moment. Then, so am I. Good. I sipped my coffee. That's good. I sipped my coffee. That's good. He reached over and tucked a strand of hair back from my face. A small, unhurried gesture, familiar and certain. His hand didn't linger, just the touch, and then it was gone. But I felt it like a decision. Herman, I said. Yes. When we leave here, I'd like it if you came back to my apartment. He looked at me. The look was steady and thorough. Elliot is with his aunt until 2, I said. The apartment will be quiet. I have coffee there too, better than this, and I stopped. Started again. I'd like more time with you. In a quiet place, just us. Okay, he said, quietly, with that precision that meant exactly what it said and nothing extra. We left the market at 10:30. We walked to my building through the May morning air, not rushing, not filling the space with unnecessary words. He held a paper bag of things I had bought from one of the vendors. I walked beside him and felt the specific rightness of it, this configuration, this pace, this company. My apartment was, as promised, quiet. I made coffee. He sat at my kitchen counter and we talked. About nothing important, about everything. About the quality of light through my windows in the morning. And a book we had both read, and a decision he was weighing at work. Elliot's things were everywhere, as they always were. The soft toys, the small shoes, the board books on the shelf. And Herman moved among them with a comfort that told me he had already accepted entirely what all of this was. This is my life, I said at one point, meaning the apartment, the small shoes, all of it. I know, he said. You're comfortable with that. Yes. He looked at me across the counter. I'm comfortable with you. All of what that is. I set down my coffee cup. I walked around the counter. I stood close to him, closer than I had allowed myself to be. And I looked up at him, and he looked down at me, and the distance between us was made of nothing substantial. I've been in love with you, I said, for a while now. I wasn't going to say it first, but I've decided I want to, because we're calling things what they are. His expression, that careful, contained face, opened, not collapsed, not overwhelmed, opened. The way a room opens when someone unlocks a door that's been closed too long. I've been in love with you, he said, since the budget projection. Possibly before. Before. The first meeting. The way you presented. The way you didn't look at me when I sat down, which told me you already knew I was there. A small, certain smile. You were the most interesting person in the room that morning and every morning since. I put my hands on his chest. He brought one hand up and covered them. Okay, I said. Okay, he agreed, and then he bent his head and I raised mine, and the distance closed. The following Tuesday there was a board meeting. It was not remarkable. Board meetings rarely are. The same leather smell, the same color-coded packets, the same 38-floor view of a city going about its business. I arrived early. I arranged my section of the table. I poured water. Herman arrived at 7:58, same as always. He crossed the room, same as always. He set his materials at his usual seat, 2 chairs from the head. He looked at me across the table. I looked at him. The division head was speaking. Someone was adjusting the projector. Darren Voss was engaged in the particular performance of looking extremely busy. Herman sat. The meeting began. No one in the room knew. Not yet. We were careful, in the way that 2 private people who have decided they value the thing they're building are careful. There would be time. There was no urgency. The important things had been said in my kitchen on a Saturday morning, and they didn't need to be announced to be real. Halfway through the first segment, there was a shuffle of papers and someone's chair shifted, and I looked up and across the table in the quiet space between his notes and the outer edge of a quarterly projection. Herman Rich was looking at me, not the professional look, the other one. The real one. The one that had been slowly uncovering itself over months. The one that saw me specifically and meant it. He looked away. Back to the presentation. His face composed. I looked back to my materials. My face composed, and under the table, without fanfare, I placed one hand against the side of my life. All of it. The small shoes and the board books and the 5 a.m. wake-ups and the budget projections and the dinners and the market and the morning my son had gripped Herman's finger like an argument he intended to win, and I felt it. Warm and complete and mine. The board meeting continued. I was, improbably, entirely all right. Elliot's first birthday was on a Saturday in October. We did not throw a large party because Elliot was 1 year old and would not remember a large party, and the only people whose presence genuinely mattered were my sister and Herman. And so it was just us. in my apartment with a cake that Herman had made from an old recipe that had required 3 attempts and a significant reorganization of my spice cabinet. The cake was very good. The candle was very small. Elliot looked at it with his usual investigative focus, and then leaned forward with an air of serious purpose, and my sister and I and Herman all crowded around the small table and sang the song, and Elliot blew the candle out with enthusiastic imprecision. Then he looked at his hands, which had cake on them, with an expression of deep philosophical interest. "He looks like he's discovered something profound," Herman said. "He looks like that about most things," I said. "He gets it from you." My sister made a sound that was not polite but was extremely sincere. Herman had been part of this for 6 months now, not living here. Not yet, though we had spoken about it in the careful and concrete way we spoke about things, and it would happen, and we both knew it. He was here most weekends. He was in Elliot's life in the quiet way that he was in everything, present, consistent, without making it into a performance. Elliot, for his part, had developed strong opinions about Herman. These opinions were primarily favorable. Elliot liked Herman's voice, the low, specific register of it, and had discovered that if you pulled Herman's finger toward you, he would come, which Elliot treated as a repeatable experiment and an endlessly satisfying result. My sister left at 7, with the gracious timing of someone who understood when a room needed fewer people. And then it was the 3 of us. Elliot, tired and soft against my shoulder, Herman in the kitchen washing dishes because he always washed dishes. The October dark pressing against the windows and the first suggestion of cold coming through the old building's inadequate insulation. I carried Elliot to his room. I went through the small rituals. The clean sleep sack, the white noise machine, the particular positioning that he'd accepted for months. Now the song that was not sung well but was sung by me and was therefore apparently sufficient. I stood at the crib and looked at him. 1 year. 1 year of this specific life, this exact person. Herman appeared in the doorway. We stood together and looked at Elliot sleeping. 1 year, I said quietly. 1 year, he agreed. A year ago yesterday I was in the hospital, in the middle of the night, terrified, I know. And what were you doing at 4 in the morning? Awake, he said. I got your text at 6. I don't know when I fell asleep. I looked at him. You were worried. Of course I was worried. He said it simply. You matter to me. You mattered to me then. I reached out and found his hand in the dark. He took it. His thumb moved across my knuckles. Elliot breathed his small, even breaths. Herman, I said, yes, I want you to stay, not just tonight, in general. A beat. I think it's time to stop having 2 apartments. He was quiet for the kind of moment that isn't absence but arrival. I've been waiting for you to say that, he said. I know. I squeezed his hand. I make you wait for things. It's always worth it. I turned and looked at him in the narrow slice of hallway light that reached the doorway. The man I had met on a Tuesday in a boardroom 7 months before the whole world changed. The man who had sat beside me when I thought I was invisible and seen me specifically and decided to stay in my periphery until I had enough room to let him in. Let's go home, I said. He looked around the apartment. The small shoes by the door, the books on the shelf, the aftermath of a first birthday, a life lived. We're already here, he said. He was right. We were already here. If you made it to the end, you're my kind of person. Leave a subscribe, comment down your favorite part of the story. And if you want early access to videos, exclusive content, or just want to support the channel, hit that join button right below the video. Even 1 member genuinely means the world to me. See you in the next one.